So what is up, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning back in. Let's have a look today at the lovely Zeiss Flektogon 35mm f2.8. So stay tuned. So let's talk today about the Zeiss Flektogon 35mm f2.8. This was the primary prime lens from Zeiss during the 50s, 60s and early 70s at the 35mm mark. It was produced for something like quarter of a century before a new improved design, the 35mm f2.4 Flektogon, was released, and it is one of the most affordable 35mm Zeiss branded lenses you can buy today. It was produced in the M42 mount, the Pentax mount and the Exacta mount, and in the beginning there was the Proctina mount as well, but there are just really small quantities of that. So the Flektogon 35mm f2.8 was designed in 1950 and was shortly after introduced to the public. It had several lens updates in its lifespan and a lot of facelifts until the lens production was discontinued in 1976 because of the newly arriving 35mm f2.4. It was made in East Germany and it exists out of 6 elements in 5 groups. I personally own the first version of this lens, which is the silver version, and this version was introduced in 1953 and it was produced until 1960. My version is the 1960 one. You can see that on the first 2 digits on the serial number of my lens. The early versions have an aperture scale going from 2.8 to f16, while later versions have f2.8 to f22. So you can't stop my version down that far. As I've already told you, it's 6 elements in 5 groups, and the minimum focusing distance is 36 millimeters, which is really good, and it has 9 aperture plates, which makes a really nice bokeh because it's really smooth. It's not smooth like a 16 aperture one, but it's really nice. The aperture is also clickless, which is great for video work. So if you're into that, really awesome. So let's talk about the haptic feedback and the build quality. My version is in really nice condition, but that's because I did retune it a bit. So what I did is I overhauled the helicoid in it. It has new grease in it, and now it's working like a dream. So the focusing is really smooth, and it is really smooth all around the focusing distance. The aperture, as I've already told you, is clickless. The positioning of the aperture ring is a bit interesting. If you're not used to old lenses, you will be a bit, it's a bit interesting, yes. But it works really great. I haven't had any problems with this lens yet, but it needed an adjustment. So that's something you have to, maybe if you buy the old one, maybe you have to clean it. But that's normal with old lenses. Many of them need a re-grease. I've used this lens mainly on my Sony A7. If you have it on there, it looks a bit odd because it's a black camera and you have a silver lens on it. That's a bit not my kind of style. I do like it more to use it on the old Prakticar cameras because they are silver. It looks better. But it's a really vintage looking lens, and it's also a great performer, as we will see later on. So let's have a look at at image quality of this lens. I have to say a few things about that before we get started. You can see I've taken those images in the RAW format, and I haven't done any corrections to that, so no sharpening, nothing. It's just the simple raw image. So take that as a given. What I have to say now is the next thing that what I've done is I've changed the white balance to automatic, so that it's always equal around here, so we have nothing that's problematic. So let's have a look at those images. Let's start with the first one, which is the sleeve. The sleeve was shot at the near focusing distance of 36 millimeters, and it's done wide open. So what I really like with this image is the color rendition. It's really great. The greens pop really great. By the way, it's at ISO 100, so it's the best the lens can perform at the wide open stage. What I like as well is the rendition of the bokeh. If you have a look here, around here with the highlights, really lovely. It's not distracting. If you have a look around here, it's really smooth. If you have highlights in the background, it gets a little bit more structured around here. You can see that, but it's really nice performing. Let's have a look at sharpness. Let's go to 100. Oh, that's wrong. 100%. And let's find the sharpness point. Have a look right here. Really nice details, even those little hairs on the leaf. It's really great. We have a little bit of a glow to the image, which I think is suitable to this image. If you want to have perfect reproduction, you won't use this lens at the wide open stage. Have a look at the sharpness fall off. It's really, really smooth, really lovely. So from this point, I really love it. We have good structures. The contrast is a little bit on the weak side, but you can correct for that in post. It's not the harshest contrast. Some people like it if the colors pop and the contrast is really high. I'm not that kind of a person. I like the contrast to be a little bit on the lower side. It makes the image look a little bit more vintage, if you like. So let's have a look at a next image. This is at a little bit stock down, so it's about f4. Let's have a look at the sharpness. Yeah, have a look at right that. That's a really, really nice performing sharpness right from the start of the lens. That's really good. I'm impressed with the 60s lens and the 50s lens design to perform that good. Have a look at the bokeh in the background. It's really, really lovely. That's really what I'm searching for, a lovely fallout in the back of the bokeh. Really, really nice. Let's have a look at a little bit more demanding picture. Yeah, we are right at sunset, and we have harsh backlight, and you can see the contrast of this picture is really not that great. So if you have a harsh backlight, you can see contrast is a problem. This is at f2.8, and you can see, yeah, I'm not that impressed with the sharpness in this image. We will have a look at sharpness out of the center point a bit later on. Yeah, but the problem really is the contrast. For some people, it's a really problematic thing. But I love the vibe that the color vibes that this lens gives. Really lovely. This also is a quite problematic scene. Really harsh backlight. I wanted to have a look at the contrast here right in the center. How the lens performs. And yeah, the contrast isn't really great, so you can see that. And I'm also not that impressed with the foreground bokeh. The background bokeh is really nice. Foreground bokeh, not my cup of tea. I have seen nicer images. Let's have a look at a sharpness test. So, this is just a simple wall. I focused in the middle. So let's have a look at 100%. This is at f2.8. So sharpness in the center, really great. Let's go into the corners. And we can see two things. The sharpness is going away really fast. So right here we have no sharpness whatsoever. A little bit of structure is left, but the sharpness is not that impressive. If you have a look right here, it's really a lot better. The other thing that we see is a huge light fall off, so the lens vignettes quite a bit at f2.8. So now let's have a look at f4. If we go right here in the center, sharpness is great. Let's go in the corners. It's a lot darker, but we have a bit more structure, so it gets better, but the darkness stays, so we have a bit of vignetting. Let's go to f8. Let's go straight to the corners, and there we see a lot more details, but still vignetting. Maybe, I'm not sure, but maybe this could be a problem of the lens adapter as well. Not sure about that. That's something you might have a problem with. But that's something that you also can correct in post. So not a real problem. So let's have a look at what happens if you blow out the highlights. What happens with a lot of highlights in the image. Yeah, have a look at this. There's a bit of bubbly bokeh if you have, that's because of the lens design, but it's really not bad. Some people like it, some people hate it. I don't mind it. There are also, if you have a look down here, there is also a bit of bubble bokeh, but it's really controlled, it's not bad. I don't mind it in this image. Some lenses do it really hard. If you have a look at the Trioplan 100mm, but this is really a controlled thing. Yeah, so I'm impressed with the color rendition, really great colors. Have a look down here, have a look up here, really lovely. The contrast sometimes is a bit on the lower side, which gives this lens a bit of a vintage look. Sharpness is great in the center from the get-go. In the corners not so much. By the way, if you have a look at this image, I don't mind the vignette in here, and it doesn't appear to be that bad. So I really do like the quality of this lens, especially if you think about that this lens is from the 50s. So let's sum this lens up. Let's start with the pros for this lens. So we have a really lovely minimum focusing distance. This lens has a lot of character to the picture quality. The build quality is great. I love the center sharpness from the f2.8. and it's really good for black and white photography because of the low contrast, which makes it really lovely for soft pictures. And the distortion is really not that bad from this lens. We haven't looked at that, but you can believe me, it's really okay. It gives a lovely image. So let's talk about the cons. We have seen this a little bit in the images. We have small bits of chromatic aberration, not bad, but a small bit. If you have harsh backlight, you have a bit of flaring and a loss of contrast. We have a huge sharpness fall off to the corners, but I don't mind that as much. The bokeh is something I like, the background bokeh. I don't like the foreground bokeh, so you have to accommodate for that. Yeah, so it's nothing really bad about this lens. We have a lot of pros, and what you ultimately get is a really nice performing vintage lens, and if you're in that market, you can really go for it, especially if you are in the market for this lens because of video work. The aperture, the smooth aperture blades is really great. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.